Hey everyone, it's Kenji, and today I'm going to try and answer all of your Thanksgiving questions. Here we go. All right, let's talk turkey. So, at Beef on Weck asks, any tips for cooking a turkey that maximizes surface area for optimal browning? All right, so my biggest tip for roasting any kind of poultry, whether it's a turkey, whether it's a chicken, is to spatchcock it. When you spatchcock a turkey, essentially what you do is you cut out the backbone, or you have your butcher do it for you. You lay it out flat, and that way all of the surface area, all of that skin is on the top. And so when you roast it, all of that skin browns nicely, the fat renders out easily, and your skin ends up nice and crispy. Every year I tell people, spatchcock your turkey, you're not gonna regret it. It'll cut down cooking time by about 30%. It'll help the turkey cook more evenly. It cooks the breasts and the legs at the same time so that your breast meat doesn't end up overcooking, and it will maximize surface area for browning. So if you want the most brown, crispy skin on your turkey possible, spatchcock it. At Bob SF40 asks, will an upside turkey cook keep it more moist? So much controversy on the net about this. I'm assuming they're asking, is cooking a turkey upside down going to keep it moist? So years ago when I worked at America's Test Kitchen, Cooks Illustrated, we used to have this technique where you start a turkey upside down on a rack, and then halfway through cooking, you carefully flip the hot turkey over so that the breast side is up. The idea is that when you have a roasting pan, it stops convection from going underneath the bird. It sort of stops the air from flowing very well underneath the bird. And so by cooking the turkey upside down, you protect the breast meat, which is prone to overcooking. So the idea is that you want to give the legs a bit of a head start over the breast meat so that the breast meat doesn't dry out by the time everything is done. The problem is that, first of all, it's really difficult to flip over a turkey halfway through cooking. Nobody likes to do it. I think it was crazy for us to ever even suggest that. The other issue is that, well, the other thing is that you don't need to use a roasting pan to cook a turkey, and I don't know why anybody uses a roasting pan to cook a turkey. I think a much better option is a sheet tray. You get much more circulation, and so all of the turkey is going to cook a little bit more evenly when you have a sheet tray. The other thing that I like to do in order to make sure that the breast meat doesn't overcook by the time the legs are done is to cook on a pizza stone. So I put a baking stone or a baking steel in my oven while it's preheating, put the whole turkey on a rack on a sheet tray, and then place that on top of the pizza stone. The stored heat from the pizza stone will help the legs cook a little bit faster so that they cook at the same rate as the breast. By the time the legs are done, the breast is not overcooked. And of course you can avoid all that by just spatchcocking the turkey, which is what I recommend. At Jake Schwartz asks, how do you convince your family to let you spatchcock the turkey? They prefer to actually stuff the bird, but at the cost of dry meat. You know, my basic rule of thumb for Thanksgiving is let one person be in charge of the menu planning. They will be the chef, everybody else will be the helpers. Thanksgiving, it's not really worth arguing over the food. I think once everybody's gathered around the table, the turkey's already done its job, so who really cares if it's dry or not? Let whoever's in charge of the turkey do it. Try and keep the peace, keep the harmony going, keep the cocktails flowing, keep the wine flowing, and let the cook just do their thing. If it's dry, forget about it. Just enjoy each other's company. At Tom S4841 says, is it really extremely dangerous to fry a turkey? If so, how can you safely fry a turkey? So go search online for fried turkey disasters and you will see, yes, it is quite dangerous to fry a turkey. So a deep fried turkey, Southern tradition in the US, essentially what you do is outdoors, you take a big pot of oil and then you have a thing that will hang your turkey and you slowly lower it into the hot oil. The biggest mistakes people make when trying to deep fry a turkey, first of all, not letting your turkey defrost fully. So if your turkey has ice on it, that ice will instantly melt into water and that will cause your oil to start splattering all over the place. Make sure your turkey is fully defrosted before you start to deep fry it. The other one is using too much oil in too small a pot. So you don't want to fill up your pot any more than halfway, and even about a third of the way is good. If you can get a bigger pot with more room for that oil to bubble up, the more room you have, the better. So if you don't have enough room in your pot, the oil can very easily spill up and over the sides. That ends up landing on the fire below. You end up with a big fireball. That's the danger of a fried turkey. So make sure your turkey is defrosted. Make sure you do it on a stone patio, plenty of room around, nothing above, and make sure your pot is big enough before you start trying to fry your turkey. At King Pison asks, what's the best way to salvage the turkey that my parents are going to overcook? Gravy? At Michael Brown 1585 asks, is dry brining really that much better than wet brining? All right, so let's talk about what brining is. So brining is essentially dunking the turkey in a saltwater bath and leaving it there anywhere from 12 hours up to 24 hours, maybe 36 hours. What happens is the salt in the brine actually dissolves some of the turkey muscle proteins, particularly a protein called myosin. And what that does is that as the turkey cooks, the muscles tend to contract and they squeeze out moisture, right? So it's just kind of like squeezing out a tube of toothpaste. And just like a tube of toothpaste, once that moisture is out, you can't really get it back inside. So what brining does is it makes it so that those muscle fibers don't contract as much, so they don't squeeze as much. So at a given temperature, your turkey is going to retain more moisture when it's brined than when it's not brined. What a dry brine is when you salt the turkey heavily and let it sit there. So instead of dunking it into a saltwater solution, you just salt it and let it sit in the fridge. I vastly prefer a dry brine. The main reason is that when you brine a turkey in a saltwater solution, first of all, it's difficult. You have to have a really big container. You have to keep it cold the whole time the turkey's in there. It's hard to find the space to do it. The other thing is that when you put a turkey into brine, there's some exchange that goes on between the turkey and the water. Your water will end up a little bit pink, and that's some of the stuff from the turkey coming out, and it gets replaced with just plain tap water. So a regular brine turkey might be juicy, but a lot of that juice is just going to be plain water, so you end up with a sort of watered down flavor. A dry brine turkey, on the other hand, is going to have the same moisture retention as a wet brine turkey, but all the moisture that's retained are the original turkey juices, so you get more flavor and more moisture, and it's easier to do to boot because you don't have to have that big container. So I think a dry brine is better all around. At Tunit42 asks, what is the best salinity to target for a turkey brine? I recommend a salinity of 6% salt by weight. That's to the weight of the water you're using. It doesn't have anything to do with the weight of the turkey. No matter the size of the turkey, as long as it is submerged in a 6% salt solution, the only thing that matters is the ratio of salt to water. So for every liter of water you have, so for every 1,000 grams of water you want to have 60 grams of salt. At Gordon M 1820 says, have you ever tried the oven fried chicken wing trick using baking powder for the turkey skin to help it crisp up? This technique, combining baking powder with a little bit of salt, with salt, and then rubbing it all over your poultry skin, that's a technique I developed initially at Cooks Illustrated for a roast chicken recipe. The idea was to get the crispiest roast chicken possible. What happens is the baking powder, when you mix it with salt, as the chicken juices come out, they cause these sort of little protein-rich bubbles of liquid to form on the surface of the chicken that sort of dry out as the chicken is roasting. And so you get these little micro blisters that add lots of surface area and crunch to the chicken's skin. It's a great trick also for oven fried buffalo wings. So I have a recipe for that in my book, Oven Fried Buffalo Wings. It's a very popular technique these days, so you'll see lots of recipes for it around. If you want that extra crisp turkey skin, a mixture of baking powder and salt rubbed all over the turkey skin before roasting it is going to help you get there. Darthdiculous 6511, that is a Darthdiculous name, says, the turkey is probably my least favorite Thanksgiving dish. It's so boring. How can I make it less boring? Well, last year I published a recipe in the New York Times for mayo rubbed turkey. And in fact, if you watch, I'll leave a clip for it, but Kevin Bacon made that turkey recipe and he loved it so much that he even wrote my name down. He wrote my name down on his hand and talked about it on the Jimmy Fallon show. So if that mayo rub turkey is good enough for Kevin Bacon, I think it should be good enough for anyone. The idea is that the mayonnaise can carry whatever flavors you want. So whether that's herbs blended into the mayonnaise, whether that's garlic, whether that's your favorite spice blend, whatever it is, the mayonnaise is going to help carry that flavor. It's going to help it stick to whatever part of the turkey you rub it onto. And as it roasts, the mayonnaise basically disappears. It forms a very thin layer of proteins that help the turkey brown more evenly while keeping the flavor in place. So I recommend a mayo rubbed turkey. As weird as it sounds, it is delicious. I'll leave a link below. At Sai Eva asks, how long should the bird rest before carving? So my basic rule of thumb is to use a thermometer. So a turkey will typically need to rest about half an hour or so as a sort of general ballpark figure. But what happens is when you roast your turkey, after it comes out of the oven, there's going to be some carryover cooking. That is, the hotter parts of the turkey on the outside, the heat from them, some of it's going to dissipate into the kitchen, some of it's going to continue traveling into the turkey. And so the center of the turkey is going to continue to rise in temperature even after it's out of the oven. What you want to do is wait for that temperature to rise and then start to drop back down again. I like to carve the turkey when the center it has dropped back down to around 140, 135 degrees. So that's typically about half an hour after it comes out of the oven. At Chrono2x says, there are so many Thanksgiving videos about cooking a whole bird. Is there anything different that you would do when cooking just a small amount of turkey for two? Which parts, different techniques, etc.? I am personally a fan of turkey breast. I know that's a controversial statement because I think a lot of people are used to having very dry turkey breast. If you're cooking just the breast and you brine it, it's so loud upstairs. Sorry, that's two little kids playing. If you have a turkey breast and you dry brine it and you don't overcook it, that is, you don't let it come up above, say, 160 degrees at most. I prefer around 155 degrees. It is going to be extremely juicy and extremely delicious. There's nothing else you really need to do than a turkey breast. And honestly, even if you're only cooking for two, I would cook a whole turkey breast. If you cook it right, use a thermometer. It's going to be so delicious that you're going to want the leftovers anyway, so that's what I would recommend. Another thing you can do if you find regular roast turkey to be boring is to make what I call a turchetta. So it's essentially turkey breast that is cured and roasted in the style of an Italian porchetta. A porchetta is essentially, you take the pork loin and all of the belly and you season it with fennel and rosemary and garlic and you roll it up tightly so that it's wrapped in skin and then you roast it whole. What you can do is you can take turkey breast, season it the same way, score it deeply, season it the same way, wrap it up in its own skin into a nice roll, roast it slowly, and then sear it in a pan. I have a recipe for it in my book. I have a recipe for it on Serious Eats. And in fact, my friend Steven over at Not Another Cooking Show, excellent YouTube channel you should follow, he just did a video for it following essentially my recipe. So if you want to see my recipe in action made by someone doing it really well, watch that video. It's a great way to do turkey. It comes out super juicy, it cooks evenly, it looks stunning on the Thanksgiving table, it slices evenly, it's boneless. One of my favorite ways to do turkey. It is sort of a technical thing. It's going to take some work. You have to use butcher's twine, you have to take the skin off the turkey. You are going to get your hands messy doing it, but I think it's worth it. It's time to talk about my favorite part of the meal, which is the stuffing, or the dressing, if you will. So at Rekgar86 asks, is there a way to make stuffing without loading the turkey that has the same flavor and texture? It's really difficult to get the same flavor without roasting the stuffing inside the turkey. Of course, the problem with putting the stuffing inside the turkey is that you have to get that stuffing to the final roasting temperature of the turkey, so 160 degrees or so. And by that time, most of the turkey is overcooked, so it's really difficult to make a nice juicy turkey and also have that turkey flavored stuffing. But what I found is the best solution is actually to cook your stuffing in the slow cooker. So make your stuffing mixture the same way you would as if you're going to put it into a casserole dish, but instead load it into the slow cooker, turn on the slow cooker, let it cook for 8 hours or so. It comes out super, super moist, just as if it was roasted inside the turkey. And if you want to add that extra turkey flavor, go ahead and take some of your turkey pan drippings, drizzle them on top for the last half hour while your turkey is resting. It will absorb the flavor of the turkey and you'll get that really nice moist stuffing texture with some of that turkey flavor. It's not going to be exactly the same as the turkey, but it will get you close. Kobayashi7532 says, is homemade stuffing / dressing from scratch worth the extra effort, or is it better to just use a box of stovetop? We grew up eating stovetop stuffing. If you're not familiar with this, stovetop comes in a box. Essentially, you boil some water and butter in a saucepan, you dump the box of breadcrumbs and seasonings in there. It also has some dehydrated celery and onions and stuff. You cover it up and you let it sit, and then voila, 10 minutes later, you got stuffing. I am a fan of stovetop, especially if you doctor it up a bit. That said, I think Thanksgiving is the one time a year when it's worth making the stuffing from scratch. It's my favorite part of the meal. If I'm going to spend time making one thing, it is going to be the stuffing. I have a great recipe for it. I'll leave a link below. At first name, last name, BP5CM says, when making stuffing, is there a difference or advantage to using stale bread versus fresh bread and lightly toasting? That is a really good question, and the heart of that question is what is the difference between stale bread and dry bread? So any baked good is going to undergo a process called staling as it rests. Essentially, when your bread is fresh out of the oven, all of the starches in there are in a sort of gelatinized state. They're going to be soft, they're going to be pliable. Your bread is going to be soft and squishy, stretchy. As the bread ages, as the bread sits, those starches are going to recrystallize, and that's what's going to turn your bread kind of hard, especially a leaner bread, something like a rustic country loaf, a sourdough, something like that is going to get hard pretty fast. That's going to happen even if it doesn't dry out. So you can take your bread, wrap it in plastic wrap so that no moisture escapes. It's still going to get harder and staler. Often what happens at the same time as staling is drying, so that's when moisture actually leaves the bread. When you're making stuffing, staleness is not the part that matters. What matters most is the dryness of the bread. And the reason it matters is because you're going to be adding liquid to there. So if it's still a very moist bread, it's going to end up waterlogged. Your stuffing is going to end up soggy or mushy, and you don't want that. So making sure that your bread is either dry by slicing it and letting the slices sit out for a couple days so they completely dry, or by taking the bread, slicing it, and toasting it in the oven or letting it dry out in the oven before you make your stuffing. Making sure that your bread is dry is really essential for stuffing. At Tchotchkes asks, what should I put in my turkey stuffing? I am a big fan of classic stuffing flavors, so my stuffing starts by sauteing some sage sausage, so breakfast sausage flavored with sage. You can find it at any supermarket in the US. Jimmy Dean does a version of sage sausage, for example. Adding some onions and celery, adding some fresh sage. Sometimes I'll add other herbs like parsley, maybe some rosemary or thyme in there. And then plenty of turkey stock or chicken stock, the turkey drippings, dry bread. I like to add some eggs in there so that my stuffing has sort of almost a savory bread pudding texture to it. And then I load it up in a casserole, a buttered casserole dish. I bake it in the oven. And so I really like that sort of bread pudding texture. If you want your stuffing to be a little more sort of, well, less custardy, you don't have to add the eggs in there. But for me, classic stuffing, sage flavor is the way to go for me. All right, let's talk potatoes. At Kevin Friedman 6766 says, what's the best way to make mashed potatoes ahead of time and reheat them on Thanksgiving, ideally preserving that rich buttery flavor? So the problem with mashed potatoes, if you've ever tried to make them in advance and reheat them, is that they never have the same sort of smooth, creamy, buttery texture that they have when you first make them. There are a couple ways to solve this. One of them is if you know you're gonna make them all ahead of time, it's not just leftovers, you mash your potatoes. I like to do them through a ricer. You can also just mash them, of course, with a masher by hand, but don't add your butter and cream or milk yet. Don't add your dairy. So what you do is on Thanksgiving Day, heat up that dairy in a saucepan on the stovetop and then fold in the potatoes right before serving, and they'll stay nice and creamy. Another good trick is if you've already made your potatoes and added the dairy, the microwave is the best way to reheat them. The problem on the stovetop is that mashed potatoes are sort of so thick that it's really hard to heat them through evenly without sort of drying them out or without burning them to the bottom of the pan. The microwave will heat them much more evenly and much more effectively. At KM3910 says, I feel like this is an easy one, but do you have a strong potato preference for Thanksgiving mashed potatoes? I like my potatoes to be really smooth and creamy, so the way I do my potatoes is I take russet potatoes, I dice them up into sort of big chunks, 1 or 2 inch chunks, I rinse them to get rid of excess starch, then I put them in cold water, bring it up to a boil them until tender, drain them, rinse them again to get rid of more excess starch, and then press them through a ricer or a food mill, and then I fold in my butter and milk or butter and cream. That's the way to get sort of the lightest, fluffiest, creamiest mashed potatoes. If you want yours chunkier, my older sister likes them chunkier, that's totally fine. All you have to do is boil them whole. You can boil them in the skins to get a little more flavor, rub the skins off, and then mash them with a potato masher with your cream and butter at the end. Ooh. Hey there. All right, moving on to Thanksgiving sides. Danny Ackman 5422 asks, vegetable dish ideas for your vegetable hating family. All right, if your family hates vegetables, I don't think there's going to be a lot of vegetable dishes they're going to like, but I think the most crowd-pleasing ones tend to be the ones that are heavily roasted. So if you take something like root vegetables like carrots or parsnips, or you take something brassicas like Brussels sprouts and broccoli, toss them in some oil, add some salt and pepper, throw them in a 425-degree oven, let them roast until they're really nice and dark. Especially brassicas, things like Brussels sprouts will get really nice and nutty and sweet if you roast them really deep. And I think those are real crowd pleasers, especially if you grew up like in the 80s or 90s. Brussels sprouts back then used to be really different. They used to be a lot more bitter. Modern Brussels sprouts are actually a lot sweeter. All of that bitterness has been taken out of them. So if you used to hate Brussels sprouts as a child, try them again now as an adult and you might find you've changed your mind. At Dora Canals 1003 says, "Hi Kenji, love your pizza recipes." Thank you, I love my pizza recipes too. "Is it okay to use canned cream of chicken or cream of mushroom soup in recipes like green bean casserole, or are there better, healthier options that are just as good and just as convenient?" Nothing's gonna be as convenient as opening up a can and throwing it in there. You know, the classic green bean casserole is frozen green beans, a can of cream of mushroom soup, maybe cream of chicken soup, mixed together, put in a casserole dish topped with French fried onions. Nothing's going to be easier or more convenient than that. And if that's the way you like it, there's absolutely nothing wrong with using frozen green beans or using canned cream of mushroom soup. That said, if you want, I have a recipe in my book, The Food Lab, also on SeriousEats.com. I'll link to it below, but I have a recipe for homemade green bean casserole that starts with fresh green beans. It also has you make your own cream of mushroom soup. So you start by sauteing mushrooms and onions, adding a bit of flour, adding some milk to make a really nice creamy mushroom sauce that you bake it all together. I think it tastes better. That said, it's not the classic thing. It also takes a lot of time. So if convenience is what you want, go ahead and use the can and don't feel bad about it. At Liz No Red says, "My very southern family is visiting me in Seattle for Thanksgiving, and I'd like to cook something specifically Pacific Northwest for them. We'll have turkey, cornbread, and mac and cheese, so would love a dish to bring in some acid or fresh flavors." Any suggestions? Well, Thanksgiving time in Washington is apple season. We have lots of apples in Washington, so I suggest something with apples. In particular, I would suggest doing a nice salad with apples. So something like with chicories or maybe arugula, some sliced apples in there, maybe some walnuts or toasted pecans, a little bit of blue cheese, maybe some pomegranates if you're feeling extra fancy, and make a nice vinaigrette for that. A really nice bright salad with a bit of a crunch. I think that goes really well on a Thanksgiving plate. I'll have a recipe down below that you can follow if you want. Add apples to it. If you want to add apples to your stuffing, that's also a nice sort of Pacific Northwest thing you could do. My older sister likes putting apples in her stuffing. I don't personally like it, but if that's what you want, go for it. I think it's great. I mean, no, I don't think it's great, but some people think it's great. All right. McGoblin2062 says, "Do you prefer cranberry sauce with whole cranberries in it or the smoother version?" I prefer the chunkier cranberry sauce. That said, I also have a soft spot for the jellied kind, even when it has the ridges in it. You know, I bought a can this year of Ocean Spray, the whole cranberry sauce, as opposed to the jellied kind while I was developing Thanksgiving recipes. And I found it to be actually surprisingly good and almost tasted like homemade. That said, I generally make my cranberry sauce from scratch and I like to leave it chunky. At This Foo right here says, "Growing up, the cranberry sauce was always so polarizing. Have you found a dish that could bring the sweet tart and moisture akin to the traditional cranberry?" I don't know why there are so many scare quotes in there. That said, if you don't like cranberry sauce, I would suggest something like lingonberry jam. You know, you can get it at IKEA. You go and buy a jar of the lingonberry jam. It's a traditional accompaniment to Swedish meatballs, but it has that sort of sweetness and tartness that goes really well with roasted meats. It'll go really well with your turkey. You can buy a jar of it. It'll taste different from your cranberry sauce, but similar enough that it will hit all the sort of sweet and tart flavor notes that you want with your roasted meat. So lingonberry jam, lingonberry jam. That's what I would suggest. At Hunter Jorgensen 1145 says, "What is the best kind of bread to make or have for Thanksgiving?" I would say the typical Thanksgiving bread is something that is pull apart, that's easy to share. So something like a Parker House roll or even just like a typical little dinner roll would be great. But you know, if you're a sourdough baker, if you love that flavor, you can go ahead and do that as well. Thanksgiving, I think it's not a time to really restrain yourself. Do what feels right to you. I like a Parker House roll, but if you like something else, do what works for you. At Maui Wowie Owie says, I feel like you've probably done a video on this before, but you should do your favorite Thanksgiving side or your favorite take on a side. I'd love to try something new this year. Well, my favorite Thanksgiving side is by far the stuffing, or if you want to call it dressing, I do it in a separate casserole dish on the side. I don't roast it in the turkey, so technically it would be called the dressing. I do have a video for it. You can find it on my YouTube channel. If you search for it, I will also link to it down below. It's an older video, so it's done in my older style, but the recipe is in there. The recipe is also in my book. It's also free on Serious Eats, so all those links you'll find, all right? At SSJ5 got on says, or Godin got on, I don't know, says tips to elevate cranberry sauce from basic to something that people will want seconds of. So cranberry sauce is real easy to make from scratch. If you get fresh cranberries, buy a bag of fresh cranberries or a bag of frozen cranberries, add sugar to it, just a little bit of water to get it going in a saucepan on the stovetop, and you cook it until the cranberries burst, and that's basically your cranberry sauce all done. If you want to elevate it a little bit, I don't like to use the word elevated, but if you want to mix it up a bit, add some spices in there. I like adding maybe a cinnamon stick in there. You could try adding some star anise pods in there. You could also add some orange zest or grapefruit zest. I think that adds a really nice flavor that goes well with cranberry sauce. So I like to keep my cranberry sauce simple, but you can always add a couple of extra flavors in there if you want as well. All right, it's time to get on board the gravy train. So at Avramoslin5166 asks, there is never enough gravy. Using the drippings and giblets from the gravy is awesome, but how do I make a solid but fast gravy to keep the gravy boat flowing? So I always use either some homemade chicken stock or turkey stock that I have in the fridge made ahead of time, or even boxed stock or canned stock is fine. Low sodium boxed or canned stock so that you can reduce it down. What I do is I take that stock, I fortify it with some other flavors. So I might throw some carrots, onions, celery in there, maybe roast them a little bit beforehand. I will add the turkey neck, I will add the turkey giblets, and I will let that simmer for a little bit, and then I will make my gravy by making a roux and pouring that stock in there. You can use as much boxed stock as you want, and it will taste just fine as long as you fortify it and you add those extra flavors to it, those extra sort of vegetables and meat to there. So the trick is to use boxed stock. Don't worry about it. I have a recipe down below. It's on Serious Eats. There's a recipe in my book as well. It's all the same recipe, so you can get it for free. I'll have a link below. At Teppy Meg asks, how do I mess up the gravy every time? I whisk the whole time and it always winds up chunky. So the way you typically make gravy, a gravy is essentially what's called a velouté. So it's a stock that's been thickened with a roux. Essentially, the typical way, the traditional way you make a velouté is you would take your butter and flour, you cook it in a saucepan while whisking it until it gets to the color you want. It could be blonde, it could be dark brown, whatever color you want. And then very slowly you drizzle in your hot stock, whisking the whole time so that you don't get any lumps. It's a very time-consuming, it's a very treacherous way to do it, I should say, because if you add your stock too slowly and you don't whisk fast enough, the roux can form these clumps that cook hard and then they don't ever soften up again. You can maybe go in there with a hand blender or throw it into a regular blender to smooth it out, but it's very hard to do. Even if you're a seasoned professional, you have to be constantly whisking really hard. The trick is don't do it that way at all. Do it the Chef John from Food Wish's way, which is to add cold liquid to hot roux, no lumps, no problems. So you take all of your liquid cold, dump it in all at once to your hot roux, then you can take it chills it immediately, so your roux doesn't cook anymore, it doesn't form those lumps, you can take your time whisking it in, get it nice and smooth, and then when the whole thing comes to a boil again, it's going to be perfectly smooth. You don't have to worry about the lumps. That is the easiest way to do it. Forget the traditional way, do it the Chef John way. At Julia Sekszenski, I'm sorry, it's a Polish name I believe that I am mispronouncing, 9850 says, do you have any non-traditional Thanksgiving dishes that you would recommend serving, or are there classic Thanksgiving dishes with non-traditional preparations you would recommend? So the one non-traditional dish that my family made growing up was the gravy. We would make a traditional Thanksgiving gravy, but my grandmother would always add a little bit of soy sauce to it. And to this day, I still add a little bit of soy sauce to my gravy. I think it makes it taste great. Even if you don't love soy sauce, adding it to your gravy gives it that little punch of umami that I think, I don't want to say elevates it, but gives it a different sort of flavor that goes well with everything. So add a splash of soy sauce to your gravy. I think it tastes wonderful. At dtemp132 says, you've got a gravy train that has broken with a layer of fat on top. How fix? Pour new roux, pour old gravy into roux, whisk constantly, gravy fix. Why use more word when few word do trick? At Mega Rustdog says, America's Test Kitchen put out a video recommending better than bouillon base over store-bought stock. A bit curious for your take on it. Of course, homemade is best, but I'm probably realistically not going to make a lot of homemade stock. So first of all, I used to work for America's Test Kitchen, so I trust what they do implicitly. My friend Dan runs the magazine now. He is amazing and does an amazing job there, as does everyone there. So I would trust what they say. They do great taste tests. I keep a jar of Better Than Bouillon in my fridge at all times. I do think it tastes better than most store-bought stocks. The one problem with Better Than Bouillon is it has a little bit of a graininess to it. So if you want a perfectly smooth gravy, I would recommend getting store-bought stock. But if you want a shortcut, Better Than Bouillon is a great one. The other problem with Better Than Bouillon is it tends to be salty. So it's a little bit difficult to control the salt content there. But that said, I use it all the time. I think it's fantastic. All right, we got a couple questions from vegetarians and vegans for Thanksgiving. At Sequence of Noises asks, if you had to pick a main course for vegans or vegetarians, what it be? Thanks, Kenji. It be my vegetables Wellington. So this is a dish that's a process. It involves soaking nuts and then braising them, making a filling with beans and nuts, roasting some vegetables, some mushrooms, some carrots, wrapping it all up in puff pastry and roasting it together. It is a beautiful, stunning dish. It does take a day or two to make, so you have to plan ahead for it. That would be my recommendation. Of course, if you don't want to do all that extra work, I think doing some sort of squash casserole, some sort of squash lasagna, or even a red sauce lasagna with ricotta is great. Doing a classic macaroni and cheese casserole, or honestly, Thanksgiving to me is all about the sides anyway. So just having a ton of great sides, some great vegetarian sides, I think that is more than satisfying for a Thanksgiving plate. At Anonymous Fraser asks, any tips for a vegetarian or vegan gravy? I feel like there are plenty of meatless workarounds for most Thanksgiving foods, but gravy is the one I haven't perfected yet. So I think a good vegan or vegetarian gravy starts with a great vegan or vegetarian stock. So get a good mix of vegetables, onions, carrots, celery are the classics. I would also add to there mushroom scraps. I would add maybe some fennel. I would add a whole host of herbs. So parsley, sage, rosemary, thyme, your classic Scarborough Fair herbs. Roast everything really deeply, all those vegetables really deeply, and then make a really nice dark vegetable stock out of them. And from there, you make your classic gravy. If you want to really boost the flavor of that gravy, I think adding a little bit of miso paste to there, finishing it off with a little bit of soy sauce, that's really going to boost sort of those umami, sort of meatier flavors. I hesitate to use the word meaty because I don't think vegetarian food has to taste meaty, but those sort of umami flavors. So miso paste, really heavily roasted vegetables, a really nice dark brown roux, that's going to get your really satisfying vegetable gravy. All right, let's talk about pie, dessert time. At Sharon Huey 9516 says, please, please, please help me with pie crust. I can't make one to save my life. All right, so one of my most popular recipes of all time is a pie crust recipe I wrote for Cooks Illustrated back in, I don't remember what year it was, 2007, I think, November, December of 2007. So let's talk about the problem with pie crust. So the way you make pie crust is you start by cutting butter and shortening into flour. So you want to cut the butter and flour into there until it forms a sort of mealy texture. And then you want to add just enough water that it forms a dough that you can roll out. Your temptation is to add more water because you want your dough to be really easy to roll out. You want it to be nice and malleable. And if you don't add enough water, your dough cracks when you try and roll it out. So the problem though is that water and flour, when they mix, they form a substance called gluten. So gluten is great. It's what gives bread and pizza dough. Its structure, it's what makes bread chewy, but it will cause your pie crust to turn tough and leathery if you've ever added too much water to a pie dough. So the goal with pie crust is to add as little liquid as possible, but that makes it really hard to roll out. So what's the answer? The solution we came up with at Cooks Illustrated was to use a combination of ice cold water and vodka instead of just pure water. So vodka, 80 proof vodka, is about 40% alcohol. In fact, it's exactly 40% alcohol. Gluten does not form in alcohol. So what happens is you're able to hydrate your pie dough to a point where it becomes malleable, as easy to roll out as Play-Doh, but you're not forming all that excess gluten. So as the pie crust bakes, the alcohol burns off, and your pie crust ends up really nice and flaky, really easy to roll out. It solves most of the problems that people have with pie dough. I'll leave a link for the recipe down below. It's published on Cooks Illustrated. I think it's been published in the New York Times now. We've published it on Serious Eats. It's all over the internet. So the vodka pie crust recipe from Cooks Illustrated 2007, I think that is the solution to most people's pie problems. At the Great Wall 1224 asks, what are some of your favorite pie recipes or recipe tips? I really like the filling to be glossy and jammy, similar to the consistency of the canned stuff, but obviously with better flavor of fresh fruit. How can I make sure that my fresh pies turn out with great texture as well as taste? Okay, here's an interesting thing with apples. So the way you make an apple pie, you take your apples, you add some sugar, you might add some lemon juice, you add a little bit of flour, maybe you add some cinnamon, nutmeg in there, some spices, whatever you want. You toss it all together. If you take those raw apples and put them into a pie crust, as the apples bake, they will turn very mushy. They'll turn almost to like an applesauce consistency. But if you par cook the apples, the sort of carbohydrate glue that holds the apple cells together transforms into a more stable form that doesn't break down as it cooks. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, but if you par cook your apple pie filling, that is, you either cook it on the stovetop in a saucepan and let it cool before putting it into your pie crust, or what you can do is you can cook it sous vide if you happen to have a sous vide bath. The apples will actually stay more intact, will stay glossier, will keep a bit more of their bite than if you put them in raw. It's really counterintuitive, but par cooking your apples is the trick to making sure that your apples don't break down in the pie. I have a lot more on the science of that. I'll leave a link below. It's all written up on Serious Eats. The other thing is that you want to pick the right kind of apple. So generally, the more acidic the apple, the better it's going to hold together. And the sort of sweeter the apple, the more it's going to fall apart. So something like a Red Delicious is going to turn to complete mush. Something like a Granny Smith is going to stay a little bit firmer. My favorite apple to use for an apple pie is a Golden Delicious. It has a really nice balance of flavor and the acidity there to help it keep its texture and to add flavor to it. At 1234 string of numbers, Stewie Griffin says, any thoughts on canned versus fresh pumpkin for pies? Yeah, so a long while back when I was working at Cooks Illustrated, my friend Francisco Robert, he worked on a recipe for a pumpkin pie, and what he found was that the best way to get sort of pumpkin-y flavor in a pumpkin pie was to actually use a combination of canned yams and canned pumpkins. Generally, canned pumpkin is going to taste better than fresh pumpkin for pies. It is possible, of course, to roast your own sugar pumpkins, to roast maybe your own curry squash, something like that, and puree it to make a pumpkin pie. I generally find it's more work than it's worth, and that the canned stuff is going to have better flavor and a better, sort of more consistent result than if you try and use the fresh stuff. At Vigilant Cosmic Penguin 8721 says, what's the deal with the canned pumpkin that's always used for pumpkin pie? Is there a type of fresh pumpkin that I can buy that can be used for a pie? What you find in cans of pumpkin is actually a thing called Dickinson squash. It's specifically grown just for pumpkin, just to put in the cans. I think something like 70 or 80 or maybe even 90% of what you find in a can is going to be Libby's brand canned pumpkin, and that's all made with this thing called Dickinson squash. It's actually similar to a butternut squash, a slightly different shape. It doesn't look anything like the jack-o'-lanterns you get. If you want to make your own homemade pumpkin puree, the best pumpkins for that are going to be sugar pumpkins, curry squash, or Hubbard squash. Those would be my recommendations. Or even something like a butternut squash or acorn squash is going to make a great pureed pumpkin for your pumpkin pie. So the day after Thanksgiving, what do you do with all that stuff? Joseph, with a lot of F's, says, what are your favorite Thanksgiving leftover ideas? Oh my God. So as a food writer, especially one who used to work for a magazine and a website, every year you have to come up with Thanksgiving leftover ideas. This year I came up with an idea for the New York Times for these leftover Thanksgiving sort of hot pockets. So you take pizza dough, either store-bought, even canned pizza dough will work, or homemade. You take your Thanksgiving leftovers, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's a fun activity to do with kids. Everybody can make their own. You roll it up in the pizza dough and you bake it. Everything steams inside there and I think it's really delicious. That's one of my ideas. That's my fresh one for this year. You can even glaze it with gravy. My number one favorite thing to do with Thanksgiving leftovers is stuffing waffles. We came up with this idea at Serious Eats a long time ago. You take your leftover stuffing and you put it into a waffle iron. It comes out crispy and delicious. It is the best way to enjoy leftover stuffing. I like doing it with a mix of gravy and maple syrup on there. Some people like to spread it with cranberry sauce. And of course, there are a million recipes for this online now. Some other leftover ideas, I will leave links for all of these below, but I wrote a list because these are some of the ones I've done over the years. All right, so stuffing waffles, stuffing Hot Pockets, mashed potato or sweet potato pancakes, Sichuan style strange flavor turkey, turkey carnitas, turkey and lemon soup, roast turkey soup, turkey tortilla soup, turkey and dumplings, turkey ramen, turkey quesadillas, sweet potato quesadillas, that is quesadillas made without any cheese at all, but just sweet potatoes inside. It's delicious. And turkey enchiladas. I will have links for all these below, along with some other leftover recipe links. A lot of questions about Thanksgiving planning. I know it's the hardest time of the year. Sometimes it's the only time of the year people cook. It's definitely the time when people do the most cooking. Here are some of your planning questions. At JessLaw3393 asks, what prep can be done in the days leading up to Thanksgiving versus what needs to be done that day? Any tips for managing timing, especially with the limited oven space? So there are a lot of things that can be done ahead. Certainly prepping all your vegetables, so washing, cleaning, cutting everything, having everything ready to go. What I like to do is organize my fridge so that things that are going to cook together go together. So I will, for instance, chop up my Brussels sprouts. If I'm going to cook them with some diced bacon, I will have the bacon in one container already diced. I will have the Brussels sprouts already trimmed, split in half, ready to go, and I will stack those two things on top of each other so that when I pull them out on Thanksgiving Day, they're already ready to go. I can throw them in the oven or do them in the saucepan or whatever. The things that can be done ahead, generally casseroles, even something like stuffing can be made ahead, put into the casserole dish so that you can just pop it into the oven on the day of Thanksgiving. And what I like to do on Thanksgiving is sort of think about it the way I would plan a restaurant menu, which is where you really think about all the different heat sources in your kitchen and also dishes that can be served cold, so salads, things like that. And you really want to sort of mix everything up. So have some dishes that are going to go into the oven that can go at the same time as the turkey. Have some dishes that, you know, after the turkey is out and resting, what I do is I pump the oven temperature up to 500 degrees, 450 degrees, so that I can do my hot roasted things. So things like Brussels sprouts or roasting broccoli, for example, can be done in the oven like that. Think about other heat sources in your kitchen. So a toaster oven is a great place to do things. The microwave is a great place to reheat mashed potatoes. The stovetop especially, doing things like your cranberry sauce, doing your gravy, those things can all be done ahead of time. Your gravy can just be reheated the day of. So really think about all the different heat sources you have in your kitchen and try not to overload just one of them. Try and do a mix of dishes that are going to utilize all the different heat sources. And prep as many vegetables as you can in advance. Have everything organized in your fridge. That way you don't have to run around on the day of Thanksgiving thinking, oh, what goes with what goes with what. It's all organized and ready to go. It's going to let you deal with all the other distractions that happen on Thanksgiving Day. You don't want to have to worry about planning on the day of Thanksgiving. All right, at Newton Jar asks, if somebody isn't very comfortable with multitasking and wants to make a complete feeling Thanksgiving, how would you simplify it for them? What side dishes would you recommend? All right, so here are the things I would do. A couple days before, I would spatchcock your turkey, have it salted, dry-brined, ready to roast, so that on Thanksgiving Day, you can just throw it in the oven. I would make your gravy ahead of time. At the very end, after your turkey is done, you can whisk the drippings into your gravy, but have your gravy done with some store-bought stock or homemade stock ahead of time. Have your cranberry sauce already made ahead of time and in the fridge. I would make your stuffing mixture, so dry your bread, make your flavor base for that, put all the stuffing in there, get it into a casserole dish, cover it up, put it in the fridge, have it ready to load into the oven alongside your turkey. And then I would do a nice big salad. I would prep all of your ingredients ahead of time, have them all ready to go, have your dressing ready to go in a container so that just before dinner you can toss it all together and that's already done. And then maybe I would think about one or two vegetable sides. So it could be another casserole dish like a sweet potato casserole, or it could be something like mashed potatoes that you reheat in the microwave. But don't try and go overboard with everything. Just stick to stuffing turkey, gravy, cranberry sauce, a salad, one or two casseroles, and a roasted vegetable dish. And I think that should be enough to handle, and almost all of that can be done ahead of time. At David B 3990 says, how can you balance the good but largely brown traditional dishes with bright flavors or brighter dishes to go alongside? I mean, honestly, for me, Thanksgiving is about this sort of roasty, brown, comforting flavors. I mean, you're taking brown stuffing, brown casseroles, brown turkey, and then dousing it all in brown gravy. You get a little splash of color from the cranberry sauce, but it is really a brown holiday. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you do want to keep it a little brighter and fresher, adding a nice salad on the side is the easiest way to do that. In a salad, you wash your lettuces, you have your vegetables ready to go, you have your dressing ready to go. It's a very easy thing to throw together at the last minute. It's a nice way to add some brightness to your Thanksgiving. But honestly, on Thanksgiving Day, don't worry about health, don't worry about balancing the plate. Just take comfort in those brown fall flavors. And my final tip for Thanksgiving planning is to be easy on yourself. Just remember, for most people, the point of Thanksgiving is having friends and family around, even if it's just one or two people. The point of Thanksgiving is sitting down at the table, enjoying each other's company. So don't worry if the food comes out perfect. Don't worry if it all comes out at the same time. Go easy on yourself. It's a holiday. It's meant to be enjoyed. If you stress about the food too much, you lose the enjoyment of the holiday. So honestly, who cares if the turkey is dry? Everything gets covered up by gravy anyway. So be nice to yourself, be nice to your friends and family, be nice to the cook especially, and just try and relax and have fun on Thanksgiving Day. All right, we got some questions from our international friends here. So people from outside the US who aren't familiar with our Thanksgiving customs. At Belfast Hyde asks, what are Thanksgiving essentials for an EU person who has no idea? So Thanksgiving is really about getting friends and family together. Of course, some people have smaller Thanksgivings. It might just be one person, it might be one or two people, but oftentimes in the US, Thanksgiving is about getting the whole family together. So that's really the most essential part of Thanksgiving. And then beyond that, there's of course the food. So turkey, stuffing. Generally, you're going to have a few different types of casseroles. So you might have a green bean casserole, which is green beans with mushrooms. You might have a sweet potato casserole, which is sweet potatoes that are topped with marshmallows sometimes topped with pecans. And then you might also have some sort of roasted vegetables or some sort of fall salad to go with that. And of course, there's also pie. So apple pie, pecan pie, and pumpkin pie. Pumpkin pie, which is a type of custard pie made with pumpkin. Oh, hi, Hamon. João Vitor, I apologize for butchering the Brazilian, the Portuguese, says, as a Brazilian, I'd like to know what Thanksgiving means to you and how does it compare to Christmas? So for me, Thanksgiving is the most important holiday of the year. It's the one holiday where, so I have family on the East Coast. My mother still lives in New York where I grew up. My dad still lives in Boston. I got my two sisters who live in the Rockies. I live on the West Coast. But Thanksgiving is the one time of the year where we all try and get together, either somewhere in the middle. We might meet together at my place. We might meet back at our childhood home in New York. But we always try and get the family together. The exception being this year, because this year I'm traveling for Thanksgiving. But Thanksgiving is really about getting that whole family together for me. At D. Castropti asks, if you could go back and establish which dishes would become a traditional part of Thanksgiving, which you would get rid of and which would you keep? Would a turkey still be featured? I happen to love turkey. I think it has great flavor. The problem is oftentimes turkey is overcooked, and when turkey gets overcooked, it becomes very dry, especially modern turkeys because they've been bred to be so big. The breast meat is so lean, and so it's really difficult to cook turkey evenly and to have it stay nice and juicy and moist. The trick is to brine it, cook it properly, make sure you don't overcook it. As long as you don't overcook your turkey, and if you go for something like a heritage breed turkey, something that's going to have a little bit more flavor, a little bit less meat on it, but a little bit more concentrated flavor. Turkey is one of my favorite meats to eat. So I would definitely keep the turkey. The other things I would keep are the stuffing for sure. That's my favorite part of Thanksgiving. I would also keep all of the casseroles. I would keep the mashed potatoes. I would keep the cranberry sauce. I would keep the gravy. I would keep the pies. Honestly, I would keep all of it. There's nothing I don't like about Thanksgiving. At Philip Cochrane 4254 asks, what is more common, turkey or ham on Thanksgiving in the general home in America? I've always wondered about this since I personally prefer ham, but I know the holidays is synonymous with turkeys. Just food for thought. Turkey is by far the most common thing on Thanksgiving. I don't think many people do ham on Thanksgiving. Some people might, but ham is typically something we would do on Christmas or on Easter in the US. Thanksgiving is about the turkey. All right, and we got some random questions that aren't really about the food, but are gonna be fun to talk about anyway. Paco.taco asks, do you have any Thanksgiving traditions that are not food related? Yes, my family has several Thanksgiving traditions that aren't food related. The first one is music. My family, all of us love music. My sisters and I both grew up playing, all three of us grew up playing classical music, violin. My dad plays banjo and guitar. I also play guitar and sing. My older sister plays a bit of guitar. So generally on Thanksgiving Day, we have a family jam session. So that could be my little sister fiddling, my dad playing banjo, I play guitar. We all have to sing together. So music is a big part of our Thanksgiving tradition. Another thing that we used to do on Thanksgiving was make cocktails and drink fancy wine. I don't drink anymore, so that doesn't happen anymore. In fact, my little sister doesn't drink anymore. So that tradition doesn't happen anymore, but that was one of our traditions, was drinking the nice wine on Thanksgiving Day. At Gerald Tompkins 5775 asks, just found a package of raisins that had a 2020 date on them. It is 2023 right now, by the way. Should we still use them? That said, we did, and they were just fine. What is your rule of thumb? So a thing to know about expiration dates is that they are almost completely arbitrary. They are not, expiration dates have nothing to do with food safety. They are put on there voluntarily by the food manufacturer as a suggested time that the food is going to be at sort of its peak taste quality. It is an arbitrary number. They might base it sort of on some amount of testing, but it is not a safety thing at all. So it is perfectly fine to use food that is past the expiration date. You always want to use your nose, use your eyes. If things look off, don't use them, obviously. But something like a dried fruit, the worst thing that's going to happen to them is they are going to get drier. So yeah, an old raisin is fine to use. Raisins are old anyway. I wrote a big article actually about this at the beginning of the pandemic. I wrote a big article about this for the New York Times, researched it with a bunch of virologists and food safety experts. I'll link to that down below. It might be paywalled, it might be free, but there's a lot of good information in there if you're worried about food expiration dates and what they really mean. At Popcan9855 says, hey Kenji, here's an idea. My housemates argued about cookies for 90 minutes. What is a cookie? What are the characteristics of a cookie? Are brownies cookies? Are lemon bars cookies? Someone pulled out the joy of cooking, which includes bar-type desserts or bar cookies in the cookies section. We are a house divided. We need expert help. I would say, so a cookie to me implies that you are individually either slicing or portioning out things and baking them until they are a sort of semi-dry, sometimes a chewy texture. Something that you set up as a bar and slice like a lemon bar or a brownie, I wouldn't consider that a cookie. That said, if I was writing a cookbook and I had a cookie section, I might list those things under the cookie section because they are sort of similar to cookies. You know, to me, this is sort of similar to the question, is a hot dog a sandwich? I have a restaurant where it's not my restaurant anymore, but Worst Hall in San Mateo. We served hot dogs. We had a section on the menu called sandwiches. Hot dogs were listed under the sandwiches section only because they are the most similar to sandwiches, but I wouldn't consider a hot dog a sandwich. My basic rule of thumb is if I said to someone, hey, would you like a sandwich? And they said yes, and then I handed them a hot dog, would they say, wait a second, that's weird, that's not what I wanted? Or if somebody asked me, hey, do you want a cookie? And I said yes, and then they gave me a brownie, I would say, oh, thanks for the brownie. That's, I might think to myself, wait, that's a little weird, that's not a cookie, that's a brownie. So if you would think to yourself, that doesn't quite fit, well then that's not what that thing is. That said, those arguments are fun. Honestly, who cares in the end? It's all delicious. All right, at once didactic asks, I started making Jacques Pépin's high temp turkey. See his YouTube video, I will link to it down below. Last couple years and it's a huge hit. Crispy skin, juicy bird, pan fond for gravy, deep dark gravy. Is there a reason I should ever try anything else? I mean, honestly, if Thanksgiving is about comfort, if you found a recipe that works for you, whatever the day is, whether it's a holiday or not, if you found a recipe that works for you and you enjoy it, you like making it, you know how to make it, you know it comes out well, I don't think there's ever a reason to do anything else unless you want to branch out. But honestly, if it's about ease, if you like it, do it every year. You will thank yourself for it. You will be less stressed. And if you know it's great, you know it's going to be a hit. I think that's a surefire way to have a successful Thanksgiving meal. AutoCAD 423 says, what would be your go-to dish for a Thanksgiving potluck? If I could claim the stuffing, I would claim the stuffing because stuffing is always a hit. It's everybody's favorite. So if you are the person who brings the stuffing, everybody's going to love you. So stuffing is the thing I would bring to the Thanksgiving potluck. If I couldn't get my hands on the stuffing, or if I know that I'm going to be traveling, I would actually probably make a salad. So a nice chicory salad with maybe some roasted pears or roasted apples, something like that. Some cheese, some nuts in there, a really nice dressing. I like a pumpkin seed vinaigrette, something like that. A really good salad is a great thing to bring to a potluck. You bring the dressing separately, you bring the salad in a bowl, you toss it all together when it's there. Everybody, I think, appreciates a well-composed salad. At Kelium148 says, I have a question. Why do my meals taste better when I'm watching you cook? I'm going to assume that they're not meaning specifically me, but why do meals taste better when you're watching someone else cook versus when you're the one cooking the meal? The reason is because most of what we perceive as taste, taste is something that, we do taste things on our tongue, but a lot of it has to do with aromas, which are, actual molecules of the food going into our nose, hitting some receptors there. And then the taste is actually something we fabricate in our brain. We take those signals from our tongue, we take the signals from our nose, we take the signals from our eyes and ears, we take our mood, and all of this gets sort of passed through this matrix in our brain that creates the sensation of flavor and taste for us. So as you're cooking a meal, those receptors in your nose start to get filled up. It's sort of like a lock and key, and once the key goes into the lock, it takes a while for that key to then go away, so a new key can go into that lock. So once we start smelling one smell for a long time, we become desensitized to it. And so in fact, when you've been cooking a meal for a long time, you are probably going to experience that meal differently than everybody else sitting at the table, or even the people who are casually watching you who aren't as close to the food. So you will probably enjoy the food more while you're cooking it, but other people are going to enjoy it more when they're actually eating it. And this is also one of the reasons why things that cook all day, stews, soups, braises, things like that, often taste better the next day, especially to the cook. And it's because you are smelling them with a fresh nose. All right, at Universal Sprout asks, whose arm do you want your name written on this year? So last year, Kevin Bacon wrote my name on his hand because he liked my mayo rub turkey recipe so much. I can't imagine anything cooler than having my name written on Kevin Bacon's hand. I don't know, he's a pretty cool dude. No, if Kevin Bacon wrote my name on his hand every year just so he could be reminded of mayo rub bacon, sorry, mayo rub turkey, I would be very happy. It's crazy to me that that even happened. All right, and that is all of your Thanksgiving questions. Well, all the ones I felt like answering today. I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I hope you all have a wonderful stress-free Thanksgiving. Be nice to your friends and loved ones. Be especially kind to yourself on Thanksgiving Day. Don't stress about the food. Worry about having fun and relaxing. All right, guys, gals, non-binary pals, have a happy Thanksgiving, and I will see you next time. Oh, by the way, quick plug before I go. It is the holiday season, and I know, every year my cookbook sales spike at the holidays. So if you want either one of my cookbooks, that is the Food Lab, which is sort of my big food science manual. It has actually all of those, all of my Thanksgiving recipes are in this gigantic 900-something page book. The Food Lab and the Wok, which is my newer book, which is all techniques and recipes for cooking in a wok. Both of these books, you can buy them anywhere where you normally buy your books. If you want signed, personalized, autographed copies of them, order them from Book Larder. It's a local shop in Seattle. They will ship anywhere in the world, and if you do it soon, I don't know what exactly the deadline is, but sometime in mid-November. If you do it before the deadline, I'll post the link below. I will go into the shop, sign and personalize the book for you or whoever you want it made out to. It will ship anywhere in the world, and you should get it in time for the holidays. Should. No promises. It depends on when you order it, and it depends how many get ordered. But it will arrive to you, and it will be signed and personalized by me. So that is the Food Lab or the Wok. All right. Both of them, by the way, perfect 5-star reviews on Amazon with thousands of reviews. So if you don't believe me, believe all the people who have bought them and found them useful. All right. Thanks.